This is the first of a series of university lectures on Radical General Semantics given by Gad Horowitz at the University of Toronto in 2009 and 2010. For a brief introduction to the course, see the video entitled Radical General Semantics, Ljubljana, 2010.
Actually, existing democracies fall far short of the potential of human beings not only to choose their leaders in free and fair elections, but to hold these leaders accountable and to exercise certain rights like free speech and free association, but to govern themselves. That's what it actually, if you look into dictionary definitions, you'll find maybe stuff about self-government. To govern themselves individually and collectively in every aspect of their lives. So it's about self-government. And I just realized this year there's a bit of a slide happening here in terms of the interests of the political theorist. Because it occurred to me that in ancient times, for example, people like the Stoics were interested in self-government without having any particular preference for democracy as a way of political life. So democracy as we conceive it overlaps with democracy considered politically, but that's just an observation for now. I don't know what we can do with it, maybe except to say that even if Julian Fantino becomes dictator of English Canada someday, democracy in the sense that I'm talking about will not disappear from north of the 49th parallel. And he's my nominee for dictator of Canada if we should ever need one. Because we have the same favorite song, My Way by Frank Sinatra. Self-government implies, doesn't it? Self-government implies self-construction, self-creation. So right away the notion of creativity intrudes. And by the way, creativity is a term I'm rapidly coming to hate because of the way it's thrown around in most sense. There's nothing worse than excellence, though. Whenever I hear the word excellence, I reach for my revolver. Self-construction, self-creation. Center for excellence in self-creation? I don't think so. So we don't only obey rules which we give to ourselves, a la Rousseau, and Rousseau's definition of direct democracy, in which we all equally formulate rules which we then equally apply to ourselves. We don't only obey ourselves, so we're going beyond democratia, like power of the people. Democratia means the power of the people, right? Power of the demos. We've gone beyond that, including that, but we've gone beyond that. We don't only obey rules which we give to ourselves or participate in the construction of a popular power, democratia. We decide. We have the power to decide within limits what kinds of persons we want to be, what kinds of communities we want to form. Within limits, of course. I'm no utopian. Within limits, but these limits are nowhere predetermined. So within limits which are nowhere predetermined, we decide, or we have the power to decide what kinds of persons, what kinds of communities we want to be, what kinds of realities we want to create. And so we could say that democracy is creative power, constructive power. Actually, there's a term in Orthodox political theory which fits pretty well here, constituent power. Obviously, this is not simply a matter of expanding participation in existing structures. It's not even a matter of reforming existing structures so that they make for greater participation. Not that I have anything against that, but that's not what we're about. So, in actually existing democracies, this potential that I've been talking about is blocked in many ways. So we have the notion of creativity, and we also have the notion of blocks to creativity. Now, this creativity is blocked in many ways. And in the full form of the course, I've got two full pages of description of these blocks, but I'll just mention a few right now. I'll just mention one or two right now. Blocks to creativity. One of them is the vast economic inequality. Right? It doesn't take much to verify it. Just walk outside the door and take a 20-minute walk. Vast economic inequality. If you really want to see it, walk south. Media monopolies, the war system of rivalrous nation states, the militarization of life, which creates, does it not, an incredible position to conform. This course will deal with just one set of obstacles. What this course will consider is a particular kind of block to democracy, and I'll go on using the word because I've already told you how I use it, what it means to me in the context of this course. A particular kind of block to democracy that arises out of deeply embedded ways of perceiving and making sense of what is going on. A particular kind of block that arises out of deeply embedded ways of perceiving and making sense of what is going on. These ways of perceiving and making sense of reality have been characterized as unsanity, unsanity, by Alfred Korzybski. This term was coined by a guy named Alfred Korzybski, who founded a movement called General Semantics. And this is the major source of, let's say, it's the major frame within which I hang the various parts of the course. He wrote a book called Science and Sanity. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the movement today. The official required reading for the course consists of a bunch of chapters from selections from Science and Sanity. Science and Sanity, I have to polish the credentials of this a little bit because you've never heard of it. Has anyone heard of it before coming to this course? No. How many of you have heard the expression, the map is not the territory? The map is not the territory.
Put a variation on it.
Yeah.
The description is not described.
Well, lots of people have heard this expression, the map is not the territory, or some variation thereof. That's the one thing Korzybski wrote that has survived in culture. The map is not the territory. In other words, at the very least, what we say about what is going on is not the same as what is going on. The map, that is, our verbal maps of what is going on, are not the same as what is going on. Now, human beings in general just tend to fall into the trap of assuming or believing that what they say about what is going on is the same as what is going on. And academics are particularly prone to insanity in this sense. Science and Sanity was judged by, I think it's something like Newsweek, some year like 1955, did a poll of the 100 top academics or intellectuals in the United States. They were supposed to make a list of the 100 most important books of the 20th century. And Science and Sanity was about halfway down the list in the 1950s.
Sic transit gloria mundi.
Yes.
Thus all glory passes from the world.
Thus all glory passes from the world. In 1955, you're the cat's ass, and in 2010, you're nowhere to be found, except in this course. Which makes you wonder, what other great works and great thoughts have been lost to us in the march of progress? Starting with before Parmenides. Now, another term for unsanity comes from Korzybski is identification. Those of you who know a little bit about the Frankfurt School and neighbors of the Frankfurt School in continental political thought, you may have heard the term identity thinking. It's probably Adorno coined that term, identity thinking. Korzybski uses the term identification. Well, I've already pointed to one form of identification, and that is to identify what we say about what is going on with what's going on. Identify what we say about what is going on with what is going on. Now, all of the obstacles to democracy that I haven't mentioned, let's just take, say, inequality and war. Feed and intensify identification. And identification, in turn, feeds inequality and war. You want me to back that statement up? This will take some time. So I'll say a little bit more about identification, because in a way the whole course is about that, so I've got to clumsily introduce it. To identify is to make the same. To make or treat or construct different or similar things as the same. To see them as the same, to interpret them as the same, and even to make them somehow the same. It's not just about interpreting what is going on. The interpretation actually helps to create what is going on. So identification not only unsanely interprets different or similar things as being the same, it also, in many instances, in many respects, makes them the same. Some of you may have come across a notion maybe in sociology of mass society. It was one of the favorite terms of sociologists when I was first taking social sciences. So a mass society is one in which people are made the same. Not only seen as the same, they actually are. And another way of putting this is, and this is a way that will be familiar to philosophers, another angle on identification is that it makes us experience particular phenomena as mere instances of universals or of general concepts or categories. Many different philosophers have been concerned with this from many different points of view, but philosophers only talk to one another. You know, they don't even talk to political scientists. And Korzybski and General Semantics, this is an incredible thought. It makes the fine hairs on the back of my neck stand up every time I think of it. General Semantics was actually addressed to everyone. And General Semantics was actually intended as a movement which would not be restricted to academics, but to everyone, anyone, starting in kindergarten, who could benefit from it and or in some ways contribute to it, of which more shortly. And that's really the main reason I'm interested in it. general semantics. There are other reasons, but that's the main reason why I'm interested in this dead movement, dead as a doornail, and couldn't possibly be resuscitated. To treat particulars or singularities as merely instances of general ideas or concepts or universals, that's another way of formulating the meaning of the term identification or identity thinking. Think, for example, of terms like crime. Think, for example, of a term like drugs. Think, for example, of a term like labor. Well, we could go on, and we will go on later, but what I always remember now is Ronald Reagan. Remember him? Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, somebody was crying to him about the destruction of the redwood forests in California, and Reagan's response was, "Hey, you've seen one redwood, you've seen them all." So there's identification in action. So he's not just interpreting trees as primarily instances of the category tree, he's also cutting them down. And that is a figure for the, and this is also a notion that comes from Adorno, damage to life. So identification is damaging to life. Not just trees, it's damaging to life. We could have a whole ecological spin-off here, but we won't because we've got enough green everywhere to go. In fact, why aren't you in Copenhagen at this very moment? Do you know how many? What?
It's in 80 days.
Yeah, it's in 80 days from now?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Well, are you going?
Yeah.
Why? Because you don't want to expend the jet fuel? And you know how many green activists are taking jets to Copenhagen? It's funny. Couldn't they take an ocean liner? So, we could put it this way. We're talking about a set of sensory, cognitive, the term unsanity or identification or identity thinking refers to a set of sensory, cognitive deficits that are normal. That's why Korzybski doesn't call them insane. He creates the term unsane. There's three things. There's sane, which very few people are for very few moments. Unsane, which most people are most of the time, and insane, which some people are, at least if they get the diagnosis. So it's damaging to life, and of course it's also damaging to creativity in the sense of blocking creativity. Because if you already know what something is as an instance of a general category, then the matter is closed. So openness to the new or to difference, attention to the new or to difference, is blocked by identity thinking. So there's a sensory cognitive inadequacy that Korzybski calls unsanity that is related to general social and cultural malaise. Now I repeat, the ideas per se here are not startlingly original to Korzybski. It's what he's going to do with them, which we'll see as we go on. That has fascinated me for a while. We could say, if we were feeling less cynical today, that there's an urgent need globally for a new way of thinking, sensing, feeling. Today I'm feeling too cynical to even say that. There's a need a new way of thinking, sensing, feeling, which would be, in Korzybski's terms, sane. So he's got science and sanity. We'll see how the notion of democracy, for me anyway, is very closely related to the notion of science. So we've got science and sanity, democracy and sanity. We can't just assume that everyone who's not in a loony bin, is okay. We could put this also in terms of certainty, certainty and uncertainty. And again, the ideas themselves are far from original. We could say what blocks creativity or innovation, and there's another term that has been contaminated and corrupted as far as I'm concerned, innovation. What blocks creativity or innovation is the conviction of certainty. Well, if you already know that something is an instance of a general category like drugs, people don't even talk about marijuana anymore. It's just drugs. You got some drugs? Well, what drugs in particular are you talking about? Does it make any difference? Sorry. The conviction of certainty about truth, reality, the good, etc., that's an obstacle. Here's a little snippet from George Orwell about war as a block to democracy. George Orwell wrote that war is a way of shattering to pieces materials which might otherwise be used to make the masses too comfortable and too intelligent. Orwell, of course, knew something about war and its effect on people's intelligence. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about the movement. Well, it was founded in the early 30s in the United States by a Polish emigre engineer named Alfred Korzybski. Count Korzybski. He didn't like calling Khan. He didn't like calling himself a count. But his wife, who was an art dealer in New York, thought that she could do better business if she called herself the Countess Korzybski. You can see how that might work. So he allowed himself to be called Count Korzybski in certain sense. Having experienced the catastrophe of World War I on the battlefield, Korzybski was convinced of the need for a radical reorientation, a radical transformation of the human orientation to reality, which he wrote would be much deeper than the change from merely one unsane-ism to another. It would go far deeper than the change from merely one unsane-ism to another. Korzybski witnessed much carnage on the battlefield of World War I. Some people were not put off by it. Mussolini, for example, thought that it was wonderful. He was wounded 18 times on the battlefield and went back into battle. He loved it. War lover. War, said Mussolini, is to men what motherhood is to women. Now, Korzybski uses the terms infantile and primitive to describe the actually existing regime of humanity. These terms are today perhaps faintly politically incorrect, especially the term primitive. Let's just go with it. After all, he's writing in the 30s. Infantile, primitive. Infantile institutions, he wrote, infantile civilizations based on strife, fights, brute competitions. These being supposedly the inescapable natural expression of human nature. The issues are circular, Korzybski wrote. By the way, I'm not sure whether this is from Science and Sanity or from a work which he wrote earlier, which is even more unknown, called The Manhood of Humanity, 1924. Yes, manhood was a very politically incorrect term. No one would use it today. The manhood of humanity, what can we do? He meant the adulthood of humanity, 1924. This may be from that. The issues are circular. Our rulers impose their infantilism on our institutions. The incoming generations are forced to develop under the semantic conditions imposed on them. In turn, they produce leaders. The vicious circle is completed. It results in a general state of unsanity, reflected again in our institutions, and so it goes on and on. Okay, the purpose of the general semantics movement, to teach sanity, is to teach non-identifying. Not by saying to people that you should not identify, but by giving particular practical practices, techniques, what Foucault might have called arts of the self, in order to train themselves in non-identifying. The movement became quite well known in the English-speaking world. The Anglosphere, that's a nice word, especially in the United States in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. But it fell apart during the Vietnam War, like so many other things in the States that showed promise. It fell apart in the Vietnam War and the other crises of the middle and late 60s. The movement called itself general for three reasons. Although it recruited many scientists, engineers, academics, and intellectuals. For example, Anatole Rappaport, does that ring a bell to anyone? He was head of peace and conflict studies here at U of Toronto for a while. It recruited many such people, but it wanted to appeal to all strata and actually succeeded to some extent in doing so. At its peak, at the peak of the movement, there were hundreds of study groups associated with universities, junior and senior high schools, town and cities, and as I mentioned, the Nevada State Prison at Leavenworth. It's a transdisciplinary discipline, a discipline to end all disciplines, drawing from and contributing to all areas of human experience and aiming at the transformation of all of them in a non-Aristotelian direction. Korzybski chose to define the unsane orientation towards the non-Aristotelian. We'll see why later. And he calls general semantics a non-Aristotelian orientation. Not the, but a non-Aristotelian orientation to what was going on. And that became the symbol of the movement. You can get a badge with this on it. And that's null A. So it's not anti-Aristotelian, it's non-Aristotelian. In other words, it subsumes many achievements of Aristotelian civilization. It doesn't eliminate them. By the way, there was a science fiction writer in the States in the 50s named A.E. Van Vogt. Anyone heard of him? Science fiction aficionados will at least have heard of him. He was quite better known in the 50s than now. He wrote 3 novels that were influenced. The World of Null A. So Korzybski calls general semantics a general science of human evaluation. Now, semantics, Korzybski, is not just about language, it's about all forms of human meaning making. Semantics as making meaning. General semantics. So it's a general science of human meaning making, a general science of human evaluation. He didn't say it was already such a science. His grandiose sort of goal for the movement was that it would help to construct itself as such a general science of human evaluation. And he uses the term evaluation because the term evaluation, and this is how important language is for a theorist, and then of course also for ordinary people, the term evaluation does not separate thinking from feeling. Isn't that interesting? So Korzybski is always looking for linguistic innovations like that would be saner than the terms that we're used to. Evaluation doesn't separate thinking from feeling, mind from body. Oh, it's the old mind-body split, characteristic of Aristotelian civilization. But We're not going to solve it by teaching philosophy to people whose bodies have already been left behind many years ago. or by indulging in various orgiastic phenomena like your cartoon images of the 60s. No. This is how Korzybski describes the mind-body split and its effect on society. Church for the soul, penitentiary for the animal. I mean, he is really a very boring writer, but once in a while he comes up with phrases like this. Pearls, if I may say so. Church for the soul, penitentiary for the animal. Now, putting the animal in a sort of polyamorous orgy isn't solving the mind-body split. It's perpetuating it. It's just an opinion. It's just a suggestion, and I'm only a hypnotist. So it's a general approach to understanding and transforming human meaning-making in general. Years after Korzybski's death, some of his followers developed an approach called E prime, and that is English without any form of the verb to be. E prime. And this is the way they write it, E prime. Now, after Korzybski's death, the movement really deteriorated into, at best, an interesting addendum for teachers of English and psychotherapists and stuff like that. It was teachers of English who liked E prime. I use it as merely an introduction to general semantics, as just a getting the toe into the water thing, because it really is problematic and doesn't go near the far enough. But it gives you a flavor on what's involved. You may have already been convinced by philosophers, and I am convinced, that there's no way we can simply remove the concept of is from the language. Because even languages that don't have the verb form to be, such as Hebrew and Russian, they equally suffer from the concept of isness or to be. So it's not simply a matter of linguistic reform, as some of these e-primers seem to think of it. And yet it is just working with this as a linguistic reform gives you some aperçus or insights that I think are worthwhile. Korzybski himself often inveighed against the is of identity. We've got identification, identity thinking, and identity thinking depends on the is of identity in all of its forms. Like, for example, I am a professor. Is, so I am identified with the role of professor. And when you see me on the street in some other role, you're astounded. It's like when you're on the street and you see your old high school teacher smoking a joint or something like that. You're just astonished out of your mind, aren't you? By the way, in spite of my references to marijuana, I don't smoke marijuana. But I did, and I stopped because I just couldn't take it anymore. Korzybski himself often inveighed against the is of identity and the is of predication, which in languages like English facilitate identification. Right? When I say, for example, that the sky is blue, it seems like a harmless enough statement. I'm identifying what is going on in up there, which we call the sky. I'm identifying that with my perceptual experience of blue, which, by the way, if I'm colorblind, I'm not going to have that experience anyway. I'm saying the sky is blue. The first step in E prime would be the sky looks blue to me. Now, just look at those two statements. The sky is blue, the sky looks blue to me. That's just putting your toe in the water of putting your toe in the water of E prime, which is putting your toe in the water of general semantics. But already the vibes, if I may say so, that are involved in those two statements may have gotten to you. Or let's put it this way, what kind of person would rather say the sky looks blue to me than the sky is blue? And I'm choosing sort of obvious examples. Here's another one. The stone or the desk. Oh my God, it's the philosopher's desk banging once again. The desk is, thus I prove it exists, right? No. The desk is hard. Well, actually the desk is a mass of whirling electrons with many spaces between them. It's mostly empty space. That's what our science tells us about the desk at the event level. Anyway, in E prime, rather than saying the desk is hard, we might say the desk resists penetration.